My own daughter handed me the conservatorship papers with a smile and said, "Sign here, Mom. It's for your own good." The notary public standing in my sunny kitchen was my son-in-law. I felt the world tilt, the familiar contours of my life dissolving into a nightmare I never saw coming. If you've ever felt that cold, gut-wrenching shock of betrayal from someone you trusted with your whole heart, then you understand why I'm sharing this. If my story speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine to tell, and you're not alone. My name is Irene Croft, and for 68 years I believed I had built a life on a foundation of love and family. For 35 of those years, I thought I had raised a devoted daughter. Charlotte, we called her Lottie. She came into our lives after years of heartbreaking fertility treatments. A miracle baby who filled our quiet home with so much noise and light. My husband Peter and I poured everything into her. We gave her a college education, unwavering support through her tumultuous 20s, and a standing invitation at our dinner table every Sunday. When Peter died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, Lottie became my anchor. She and her husband David, along with my grandson Leo, were my entire world. That Thursday morning started like any other. I was tidying up the kitchen after breakfast when Lottie called, her voice sweet as honey. "Mom, I'm swinging by with some papers from your financial advisor. David's coming too. He needs you to sign something for Leo's school trip. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I remember feeling a flicker of warmth. I loved these little impromptu visits. I put the coffee on, their favorite blend, and set out the ceramic mugs Leo had painted for me. When they arrived, the air in the kitchen shifted. It was subtle, a certain tightness around David's mouth, a false brightness in Lottie's eyes. They sat at the oak table, the same one where we'd shared countless holiday meals and birthday cakes. "So what's all this?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Lottie slid a thick stack of papers toward me. "It's just some updates from Mr. Aldridge's office. Standard stuff. And this," she said, placing a single-page document on top, "is for Leo's ski trip. They need a liability waiver from a guardian." I reached for my reading glasses. The print on the top document was small and dense. I started to read, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. "Petition for the appointment of a conservator," I mumbled. My eyes skipped down. Finding that Irene Croft suffers from significant cognitive impairment and is unable to manage her own financial affairs or person. My blood ran cold. I looked up at my daughter. "Lottie, what is this?" Her smile didn't waver. "It's for your own good, Mom. We're just making sure you're protected." David, the man I'd welcomed into my family, the one I'd helped with a down payment on his first car, leaned forward. "Your memory hasn't been the same since Dad passed, Irene. You forget things. We're worried." "Forget things?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I forgot to buy milk once last week, that's all." "It's more than that," Lottie said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard before. "You left the stove on last month. You couldn't remember your PIN at the grocery store. We've been talking to Dr. Evans." Dr. Evans, my trusted physician of 20 years. I'd had a routine physical with him just 2 days prior. He'd told me I was in remarkable health for my age, my mind sharp as a tack. He'd clasped my hand and said, "Irene, you have the blood pressure of a woman 20 years younger. Enjoy your life." Dr. Evans said I was perfectly fine, I said, my voice trembling. "He's being polite," David said flatly. "We've consulted with him. He's aware of the situation." That's when my eyes fell on the line at the bottom of the page. "Proposed conservator, Charlotte Marie Croft Williams." And next to it, in the spot for my signature, was a blank line. "You want me to sign this?" The words felt thick and foreign in my mouth. "You want to have me declared incompetent." We don't want to, Mom. We have to. Lottie's smile was still firmly in place, a grotesque mask. It's a formality, really. Once you sign, we can manage everything for you. You won't have to worry about a thing. We can even find you a lovely assisted living facility, the Willows. I've heard wonderful things. The Willows. It was a nice name for a gilded cage. I looked from her face to David's. They were a united front. This was not a spontaneous decision. This was a planned assault. And if I don't sign? I asked, a sliver of my old steel returning. Lottie's smile finally vanished. Then we'll have to let the court decide. We have statements, Mom, from Dr. Evans, from your neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who says you've been wandering the yard at night from David and me. It will be so much more undignified. This way it's quiet, simple. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal roar of betrayal, but I swallowed it. I looked at the notary seal at the bottom of the page, and the name next to it, David Williams, Notary Public. He had brought his stamp to my kitchen to notarize my own civil execution. I need to think, I said, pushing the papers away. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clutch them together in my lap. There's nothing to think about, Irene. David said, his voice hardening. It's the best thing for everyone. For you, for Lottie, for Leo. Get out, I whispered. Mom, be reasonable. Get out of my house, I shouted, standing up so fast my chair screeched against the tile. They looked startled but not afraid. They exchanged a look that was pure calculation. Finally, Lottie stood, gathering the papers. We'll give you some time to calm down. We'll be back tomorrow. Think about Leo, Mom. Think about your family. They left, and the silence they left behind was deafening. I stood in my kitchen, the smell of untouched coffee bitter in the air. The home I had shared with Peter, the home where I had raised my daughter, had just become the scene of my own betrayal. I stumbled to the sink, gripping the cool porcelain, and dry heaved. Tears wouldn't come. There was only a cold, expanding void. How long had they been planning this? The forgotten pin? I'd been flustered that day because Lottie was rushing me, talking a mile a minute. The stove? I'd turned it off before I left the kitchen. I was sure of it. But she had insisted she'd found it on. She'd been planting seeds, carefully tending a garden of lies about my failing mind. I thought of Dr. Evans. His behavior at my appointment had been perfectly normal. Had he been lying to me too? Or were they lying now? Driven by a desperate need for answers, I went to my bedroom and retrieved my purse from the closet. I dumped its contents onto my bed. Lipstick, keys, wallet, a wrinkled receipt. And then, something fluttered out that shouldn't have been there. A small folded square of paper tucked into the inner lining, where I never kept anything. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Irene, your daughter and son-in-law visited my office yesterday. They pressured me to falsify a dementia diagnosis. They asked detailed questions about your assets and the process for an involuntary conservatorship. I refused. Be careful. They are not what they seem. Do not sign anything. Dr. Evans, the note was dated the day of my appointment. He must have slipped it into my purse when I wasn't looking. He'd risked his career to warn me. The confirmation was both a relief and a horror. My own child. The little girl I'd sung to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose heartbreaks I'd soothed, was trying to have me declared insane to steal my life. The rage came then, a clean, burning fury that scorched away the shock and the grief. They thought I was a confused, helpless old woman. They had underestimated me. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table under the soft glow of the pendant light, and I planned. I was not going to run and hide. I was going to fight, and to fight I needed weapons. The first was information. I went into Peter's old study, the room I mostly kept closed now. I booted up the desktop computer, thankful that it still responded to our old password and whirred to life after a moment. I knew Lottie and David had access to my main bank accounts. I'd added Lottie years ago for convenience, but what they didn't know What Peter and I had kept a secret even from her was the safety net he had built. Peter had been a cautious, brilliant man. Before he died, he'd sat me down and shown me a small, fireproof lockbox hidden behind a loose panel in his study wall. "This is for absolute emergencies, my love," he'd said. "For if anyone ever tries to take advantage of you." I found the panel now, my fingers tracing the familiar groove. Inside was the box. I opened it with the key I kept on my personal key ring, separate from my house keys. There it was, the proof of my secret life, a savings account book from a credit union in the next state over, opened in my name only. The balance, where $85 million. The proceeds from Peter's secret, incredibly successful patent, one he'd never wanted to flaunt. There were also deeds to 2 rental properties in a quiet coastal town, 2 hours away, managed by a discreet property company, and a single unmarked key. I had resources, but I needed more. I needed proof of their conspiracy. At 2 a.m., driven by a cold resolve, I did something I never imagined I would do. I took my old smartphone, which had a surprisingly sensitive microphone, fumbled with the settings, and activated the voice recording app. Then I walked silently through the dark house, placing the phone on the bookshelf in the living room, nestled between 2 thick photo albums. It was positioned perfectly, just a few feet from the kitchen table, to capture any conversation with crystal clarity. I left it there to charge, camouflaged by a stack of books. The next morning they returned. Just Lottie this time. Her expression was one of manufactured concern. "Have you thought about what we discussed, Mom?" she asked, settling into the same chair as yesterday. "I've thought of little else," I replied, my voice steady. I was pouring tea, my back to her, the perfect picture of a subdued old woman. "I know it's hard," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "But it's really a blessing. You won't have to worry about bills, about taxes, about any of the complicated things. David and I will handle everything. You can just relax. What about the house?" I asked, setting a teacup in front of her. "Well, that's part of it," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We'd have to sell it, of course. The equity is tied up. We could use that to pay for your care. And there's your pension, your social security. It will all be managed. For you, for Leo's future," I prompted gently. Her face lit up with a genuine-looking smile, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd seen yet. "Yes, for Leo, for his college. This will secure everything for him, Mom. You want that, don't you? To know your grandson is provided for." "Of course I do," I whispered, the hypocrisy of her words choking me. "She wasn't doing this for Leo. She was doing it for herself. So you'll sign," she pressed, leaning forward. "I need to see a lawyer first, Lottie." "My own lawyer?" Her face tightened. "That's not necessary. We have a lawyer. It will just confuse you. Legal language is so tricky." "I think it's my right," I said, holding her gaze. A flash of irritation crossed her features, so quick I almost missed it. Then the sweet mask was back. "Okay, Mom, if that's what you need to feel comfortable. But please, don't take too long. We're all so worried about you." After she left, promising to return the next day, I retrieved the phone. My heart pounded as I pressed play. The recording was crystal clear. I heard my own hesitant voice, and Lottie's, smooth as silk, laying out the blueprint of my imprisonment. Her mention of managing my pension, selling the house for its equity, the blatant manipulation using Leo's name. It was all there. It was my first small, satisfying turn, a tiny clawing back of control. That afternoon, I put my own plan into motion. I called a cab and went to the one place I knew they wouldn't think to look for me, the Seafarer's Rest, a small, elegant boutique hotel in the neighboring coastal town where I owned property. I booked a suite for a week under my own name. I needed to be somewhere I could think, somewhere that didn't smell of betrayal. From the suite, with a view of the endless gray ocean, I made 2 calls. The first was to the property management company. I instructed them to empty one of my cottages and prepare it for my indefinite occupancy. The second was to a law firm I found online, specializing in elder law and estate litigation. I didn't choose the biggest. I chose the one with the most impassioned language on their website, about protecting the vulnerable. My lawyer, a sharp, kind-eyed woman named Amanda Rossi, listened to my story without interruption. I played her the recording. I showed her Dr. Evans's note. I laid out the contents of the lockbox. "Mrs. Croft," she said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You are not the client I was expecting when I walked in this morning. What your family is attempting is not just immoral, it's a litany of crimes. Conspiracy, attempted fraud, duress. With this recording and Dr. Evans's testimony, we can not only stop them, we can make them answer for it." "That's exactly what I want," I said, my voice firm. "Good, then here's what we do." Amanda's strategy was brilliant. Instead of confronting them immediately, we would let them proceed, gathering more evidence. She helped me secure all my assets, freezing the accounts Lottie had access to, and moving the bulk of my secret funds to a new, secure location. She also connected me with a private investigator, a quiet man named Miles, who looked like a retired accountant. While I was setting my traps, Lottie and David were growing increasingly frantic. My refusal to sign, my moving to a hotel, it had thrown them off their script. "Mom, where are you?" Lottie demanded over the phone, her voice shrill. "This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we're talking about. An elderly woman doesn't just check into a hotel." "I'm perfectly safe, Lottie." "I needed some space to think," I replied, my tone deliberately calm. "You need to come home. We're your family. We're worried sick." "Are you?" I asked. "Or are you worried your plan is falling apart?" The silence on the other end was venomous. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're being paranoid. It's a symptom, Mom." Dr. Evans said I was perfectly healthy," I interrupted. "I spoke with him yesterday. He confirmed he never spoke to you about any cognitive decline." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, searching for a new lie. "He's lying to protect himself. We have other doctors, better doctors. We're filing the petition with the court tomorrow. Mom, with or without your signature. Do what you feel you must." "Charlotte," I said, and hung up. The battle lines were drawn. Miles, the investigator, was worth his weight in gold. Within days, he provided a flood of damning information. David had been secretly laid off from his architectural firm 8 months prior, and had been draining their joint accounts with day trading losses. Lottie had maxed out several credit cards, including one she'd taken out in my name 6 months ago, spending $25,000 on designer clothes and spa weekends. They were drowning in debt, and my house, my pension, were their life raft. The most heartbreaking piece of information came about my grandson, Leo. Miles discovered that Lottie and David had been using him too. They'd been telling his teachers that I was in the early stages of dementia, preparing the ground so that if Leo ever said anything about Grandma seeming fine, it would be dismissed as a child's misunderstanding. Armed with this, Amanda helped me file a preemptive lawsuit against them, alleging fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We scheduled a meeting at my house, a place I hadn't set foot in 2 weeks. I asked Lottie and David to meet me there, telling them I was ready to talk. I arrived first with Amanda. We waited in the living room. When they walked in, they looked triumphant, believing they had won. That triumph curdled into shock when they saw Amanda. "Who is this?" David snapped. "This is my lawyer, Amanda Rossi," I said. "She's here to ensure we have a productive conversation." "You don't need a lawyer, Mom," Lottie said, her voice tight. "I disagree." I slid a copy of our lawsuit across the kitchen table toward them. "I think you'll find I need one very much." They read it in stunned silence. I watched the color drain from their faces. This is nonsense," David spluttered, throwing the papers down. "Slander, is it?" Amanda asked coolly. "We have bank statements showing the credit card fraud, Lottie. We have testimony from your former colleagues about your unemployment, David. We have records of your day trading accounts. And we have a very clear audio recording of you, Lottie, attempting to coerce your mother into signing away her rights." Lottie stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pure hatred. "You recorded me? You left me no choice," I said. "You vicious old witch," she hissed, the mask finally completely shattering. "All we wanted was what was owed to us. I'm your daughter. Everything you have should be mine. Instead, you hoard it. You live in this big, empty house all by yourself while we struggle. You were supposed to help us." "I did help you," I cried, my own composure breaking. "I helped you with your down payment. I paid for Leo's braces. I was always here for you. But helping you is not the same as letting you destroy me. It's just money." David yelled. "You're old. What do you need it for? We have a life to build, a son to raise. And you were going to raise him by teaching him that it's okay to betray his grandmother. To steal from her and have her locked away. The truth of it hung in the air, ugly and undeniable." "We're not stealing," Lottie said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "We're taking what should have been given freely. You were never a real mother to me. You were always so perfect, so in control. You have no idea what it was like to live up to that." Her words were meant to wound, but they only made me sad. This was the core of it. Not just greed, but a deep-seated resentment I had never seen. The meeting ended in a stalemate of threats and rage. They stormed out, promising to fight me in court. But the evidence was too overwhelming. A week before the scheduled hearing, their lawyer contacted Amanda with an offer. They would drop their petition for conservatorship, admit to the credit card fraud and repay every cent, and sign a legally binding agreement renouncing any future claim to my estate. In return, I would drop the lawsuit. It was a surrender. I agreed. I didn't want a long, drawn-out public trial. I wanted my freedom and my peace. The final meeting to sign the papers was held in Amanda's office. Lottie and David would not look at me. They signed where indicated, their signatures slashes of angry ink. When it was over, they stood to leave without a word. "Lottie," I said. She stopped, her back to me. "I want you to know that I love you. I always will. That's the tragedy of this. But I will never allow you into my life again." She didn't turn around. She just stood there for a moment, her shoulders rigid, and then she walked out of the office and out of my life. David followed without a backward glance. It's been a year now. I live in the coastal cottage, the sound of the waves my constant companion. The air smells of salt and pine, not memories. I've started volunteering at the local library, reading to children. I've made friends. I have a life that is entirely, authentically mine. Leo, I see him supervised at a neutral location once a month. It's a strained, painful process. He's confused and angry. Lottie has filled his head with lies about me. But I hold on to hope that one day, when he's older, he will seek out the truth for himself. I will be waiting. The other day, I was cleaning out the last of the boxes from my old house, which is now on the market. I found the ceramic mug Leo painted for me when he was 6. It's lopsided, covered in bright blue and yellow swirls. I held it in my hands, and for the first time, the memory didn't bring a sharp pain of loss, but a gentle, bittersweet ache for what was, and a profound gratitude for what is. I am Irene Croft. I was a wife, a mother, a grandmother. Now I am also a survivor. The woman who was almost erased found the strength to write her own ending. And in doing so, she found her true beginning. If you've ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet, if you've ever had to fight for the very right to your own life, then you know that the greatest revenge is to live well, to live fully, and to never, ever give up your power. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a betrayal that forced you to find a strength you didn't know you had, please share your own experience in the comments below. You are not alone, and if you want to hear more stories of resilience and reclaiming one's life, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next one.